Today, we will commence with welcome remarks by Mr. Inayatullah Khan, Chairman of Cosmos Foundation, who will then hand it over to our Chair, Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Chowdhury, to deliver his remarks. The keynote address will be delivered by Her Excellency, Mrs. Marie Masdoupi, the Ambassador of France to Bangladesh, followed by our four distinguished discussants who will each speak for a duration of 10 minutes. Our speakers are retired Ambassador Tariq Karim, Honorary Advisory Emeritus, Cosmos Foundation, Dr. Lailufar Yasmin, Professor, Department of International Relations, Dhaka University, Mr. Parvez Karim Abbasi, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, East West University, and Mr. Shafkat Munir, Research Fellow and Head at Bangladesh Center for Terrorism Research at BIPPS, Munich Youth Leader. Thank you, and we very much look forward to the discussions today. I will now hand it over to Mr. Inayatullah Khan to commence our session.
It gives me enormous joy to greet all of you, and it's my privilege to welcome today the distinguished Ambassador of France to Bangladesh, Her Excellency Ms. Marie Masdoupi. The Cosmos Foundation has emerged as an important forum for deliberating on Bangladesh's relations with friendly states. And one of the countries that are on the top of the list of our friends undoubtedly is France. Therefore, our seminar today is of special significance to all of us. I also welcome to our seminar a set of stellar personalities as discussants. I have every confidence that their contributions will enhance the quality of today's deliberations and enrich our output. It would not be wrong to say that love is at the root of Bangladesh-France relations. This is because, according to available records, the decision to establish diplomatic relations was taken on Valentine's Day, 14th of February, 1972. A month later, on 17th March 1972, Bangladesh opened its mission in Paris. The historic connections date back much further. French traders began to come into Bangladesh in the 17th century. The deep and long-standing ties between France and Bangladesh are evidenced by the existence of Farashganj in Old Dhaka that used to be home to a French market on the banks of Buriganga River, dating back to the 17th century. French traders and merchants would come down to settle here for business, and the French East India Company had its office here, importing mostly raw turmeric, ginger, garlic, chilies, and other spices. Although the establishments have faded away with time, trade relations between Bangladesh and France continue to thrive in a variety of ways. In the 50s, France's jute industry was the largest in Europe, and 1/3 of the raw jute from the industry was imported from Bangladesh, the then erstwhile East Pakistan. At the same time, cultural ties started blossoming with the opening of the Allié Français in 1959. Given the global politics of that age, the French extended support to the last independent Nawab of Bengal against the English. Indeed, the famous Battle of Palasi, when Lord Clive took over the control of Bengal from the last Nawab Siraj-ud-Dowla, a French contingent of troops had fought for the Nawabs. During the glorious liberation war in Bangladesh in 1971, the French press and the broadcast media, intellectuals like André Malraux, civil society in general, contributed hugely to the neutral policy of the French government. It is said that the French literateur and politician André Malraux, in a letter to an Indian diplomat, urged that Bengal has the potential of being a nation, not just of nonviolence, but resistance. He himself is said to have volunteered to fight in the war. France quickly recognized Bangladesh once the war was over. And recently, the two countries celebrated the golden jubilee of their diplomatic relations. Today, of course, much of the cooperation between the two countries takes place within the platform of European Union. France is currently funding various projects in Bangladesh led by the European Union, but we can also still make out the distinct contours of a direct relationship. Bilateral relations spread across political, economic, and cultural spheres. Following President Mitterrand's landmark visit in 1990, economic cooperation expanded by leaps and bounds. It began with flood protection, dam construction. Over the years, trade figures came to nearly 3 billion euro annually, with the balance interestingly tilted in favor of Bangladesh. France has backed Bangladesh on the Rohingya issues, not only bilaterally, but also in multilateral forums, including the United Nations. An important feature of the relationship is soft power connections. As early as in the 18th century, the French brought ideas of European enlightenment in Bengal. In Bangladesh, Alliance Française is a key point in the creation of a cultural linkages. France has hosted and supported many Bangladeshi artists, including Shahabuddin. The French sailor Yves Mar sailed in a barge in 1994 from France to Bangladesh, which Cosmos Books celebrated in what has been widely appreciated as an outstanding publication. The French International Development Agency, AFD, has been working with Bangladesh to support its transition to green energy, women's empowerment, infrastructure development, conservation and preservation of our heritage and archaeological sites. And France remains a major partner of Bangladesh, also within the European Union. That 3.3 billion euros figures represents a massive trade surplus, as I mentioned before, but almost 98% of that consisted of ready-made garments, while French exports to Bangladesh were just under 200 million euros. This is despite the two countries cooperating in high-tech sectors. Bangladesh's first ever satellite, Bangabandhu 1, was made by the French company Thales. Thales is also currently working on modernizing our air traffic management in Bangladesh. Other major French companies like Lafarge, Total, Veolia, Danone, Vinci, Technip, you name it, they're all here in Bangladesh. There's also potential for economic relationship to grow much further as Bangladesh emerges out of the LDC nations in 26, I guess. During our Prime Minister's second official visit to France, she emphasized and said that our trading figure volume must double by 2025. I believe that is eminently doable, not only through greater investment by French companies in Bangladesh and diversification of Bangladeshi exports to France, but also increased exports from France to Bangladesh. Most recently, our growing aviation sector has attracted interest from Airbus, in which France has a large stake. We shall see how that goes, but it represents an opportunity to go a long way towards doubling the trade volume of our own. While hoping for the best on that front, I would like to conclude by noting the deep ties between the two peoples based on a shared love of arts, literature, culture, and freedom that recognizes no bounds. That I believe remains the strongest insurance policy for the bilateral relationship to remain in good stead and also thrive in the years ahead. A personal tribute is owed to Ambassador Marie Madoupuy of France. She has put her heart and soul into the development of mutual relations in the brief time that she has been here. Today, under her aegis, relationship is growing across the spectrum of areas of mutual interest, such as aviation, energy, climate change, food security, food processing, cultural cooperation. And I could go on and on. Anyways, I will stop here with these few words, and I shall pass the microphone to our President, Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Chaudhry, to conduct and chair this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Inayat, for those excellent welcoming remarks. Now, France is more than a country. It's a civilization. To discuss any nation's exposure to France is therefore always a tall order. Today, Inayat has done a splendid job framing these relations on the canvas of history. It is true that the connections between Bangladesh, the Bengalis and the French predate Bangladesh. Over 2 centuries ago, French Enlightenment had begun to influence us with ideas and ideals of reason, nature, and humanity. The French truly admired our liberation war. André Malraux, whose visit in 1973 Inayat referred to, reflected these sentiments. He said, the tombs of the freedom fighters enshrined the values of justice and freedom with which French Revolution had set all Europe on fire. Of course, contemporary international relations are based not so much on emotions as on pragmatic realization of commonality of interests. Our discussions today will focus on those commonalities between France and Bangladesh and how to create more to fill any gaps. Also, the problem of bilateral relations anywhere today, in any part of the world, are exacerbated by the multiplicity of global shockwaves. I refer to the pandemic, the Ukraine conflict, and the financial tightening. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome every one of you to the return to in-person seminar of Cosmos after a long break that the pandemic had forced upon us. This, even though we had continued to work through the use of modern technology such as Zoom. Our topic today, Bangladesh-France relations.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. Bonjour à tout le monde. Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here this morning with such a very highly qualitative audience. So thank you very much to the Cosmos Foundation, Inayat, and Iftikhar, my dear friends. Thank you very much. I will not talk for 30 minutes because I feel I'm still too young, an expert on the subject of our lecture today. So hopefully you will not be too much disappointed. But I'm of course very open to a more prolonged and insightful discussion with all of you. So to talk about the future, let's first have a look at the past of our relations, although it already has been addressed by Inayat. So the past, it's well known that a French presence in Bengal was established during the 17th century, after that of the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Brits, etc. Trade was at the heart of that presence, and Dhaka, concerning the French merchants, the French adventurers, Dhaka was the base of these French traders. Of course, politics came into the game, and France saw an opportunity to accomplish her old dream of barring the British to take over the whole Indian subcontinent in Palashi, north of Calcutta, in 1757. A battle took place between the English forces and the allied French Bengali forces. Bengal was at that time, as reminded by Inayat, under the leadership of what was going to be the last Nawab, independent Nawab of Bengal. Alas, the Brits bribed the commander-in-chief of the French Bengal Allied forces, and the Brits won after a very long, 11-hour lasting battle. After which, the Brits conquered the whole of Bengal and Burma. Later on, in 1798, France invaded Egypt in a desperate move to make things more complicated for the Brits in East Africa and the Middle East. Bonaparte, yet to become Napoleon, stayed only 2 years in Mamluk Egypt before retreating to Europe, where he started a fierce pan-European series of wars and battles against Russia, Spain, and others. There are no detailed, so just to underline this kind of common thread over the centuries in this very defining, at that time, French-British rivalry over the world, control of the world. There are no detailed records of what happened to the French merchants of Bengal. They are not known to me, at least, during the 19th century. But what one can think that they continued their businesses, but witnessing the transformation of Bengal under the British rule. Let's take a leap to the 20th century after the end of Second World War. There was no so-called globalization at that time, but a global movement towards decolonialization, which had started. When the term came to for East Bengal, East Pakistan, France was going through a severe political instability at home, which lasted 11 years from 1947 to 1958. The Fourth Republic had been defeated in Indochina and started a very cruel war in French Algeria. De Gaulle had left French politics in 1947. France was going nowhere in the international arena, as it was much deprived of any strategy or vision. The excessive domestic instability and the rapid decline of France on the world scene, coupled to some murky activities of a few French officers in Algeria, led de Gaulle to decide to make his grand comeback in 1958. The Fifth Republic was established, a new era could start. De Gaulle reinvented a French strategy consisting of maintaining France's autonomous capacity to make decisions on the international arena. The epitome of that strategy has been particularly illustrated with the 1966 decision to leave NATO's military structure and its nuclear planning group. Domestically, de Gaulle made sure to be surrounded by many of his oldest companions, the most loyal ones. Amongst them was, of course, André Malraux, who became Minister of Culture, a natural destiny for the politically engaged writer and fighter he had always been. He remained at his post during more than 10 years, until de Gaulle's own resignation in 1969. It should be noted, incidentally, that during a visit to Congo in 1960, Malraux had a very strong words against colonialism. So it's an idle Malraux who starts to advocate in 1971 for the independence of East Pakistan. His call to establish an international foreign legion is well heard by young students favorable to decolonization, anti-American, and pro-Soviet, or a combination of those. The idea was to go and fight alongside the Indian forces against the American-supported army of Pakistan, of West Pakistan. Amongst them, Bernard-Henri Lévy, famous as BHL in France, a French philosopher who became famous since then for his fights for freedom all around the world. What is quite remarkable about the inception of Bangladesh is the way it reshuffled alliances around the cause for its independence and liberation. Independence as a state, liberation as a nation. You had France disagreeing with the US, Russia alongside India and France, China in a very awkward position, deeply embarrassed about how to deal with its Pakistani friend without too much confronting the Russians, etc. Such a messy situation was also reflected in the UN Security Council. Eventually, André Malraux's call to support East Bengali people being butchered clarified what was at stake, stopping beyond all these bizarre alliances. It was about stopping the massacres by giving in the legitimate demands of those people, notwithstanding the strategic political games going around. In publishing an open letter to Richard Nixon just after the end of the war, Malraux's goal was to point out the many contradictions of the American foreign policy in the region. Let's go to the present. The present situation of French-Bangladeshi relations is imperfectly perfect. I'll try to explain why. Our relations are politically perfect. When our leaders meet, it's always an occasion to note a broad convergence on many global and regional issues. Climate change, fight against terrorism, fight against radical Islamists, Rohingyas issues, advocacy for an open, inclusive, safe, and peaceful Indo-Pacific region, etc. On the cultural front, we also enjoy very positive results. The ancient presence of our Alliance Française in Dhaka since 1959 and Chittagong since 1965 makes them an important pillar on the local foreign cultural scene. Without too much publicity, they teach an average of 5,000 students a year in French language. And thanks to them, many French artists come to Bangladesh to perform and exchange with the thriving cultural local scene. This led France recently to grant distinctive medals to two eminent personalities of Bangladesh who avail an international exposure, Nadia Samdani and Marina Tabassum, who were made Knights in the Order of Arts and Letters, thanks to André Malraux, by the way, since this order was established amongst many new official orders during the Fourth Republic. By the end of the Fourth Republic, you know, it was a way for any minister to give a nice official gift, and it was a way to buy also some electors to get more popular. When de Gaulle came back in 1958, he asked all his ministers to review all these new, very recently established orders and to suppress the ones who were not justified or whose areas were not already covered by our two main national orders, Légion d'honneur and Ordre national du mérite. Malraux recommended to keep the Order of Arts and Letters as it was absolutely not covered by the two other French national orders. So, and de Gaulle followed his recommendations. So Nadia and Marina were granted this distinction thanks to André Malraux as well. In the field of development, France is becoming an important actor in Bangladesh, although a relatively new one. Our AFD, French Development Agency, has a growing Bangladesh portfolio. Established 10 years ago in Dhaka, its activity has been growing at an exceptionally rapid pace in the last 5 years. Compared to it now has been committing already 1.4 billion euros in the last 4 years, compared to India, Indonesia, and Vietnam, where respectively AFD invested 2 billion euros, 1.7 and 1.2 only. So it gives you an idea of the rapidity of the pace of the development of AFD's activity here. And the overall portfolio worldwide of AFD is 12 billion euros. So Bangladesh has quite a big share and a growing one here. Its scope in Bangladesh relates mainly to climate-related projects with a strong social dimension. Water and energy have quite a central position for AFD, who is deeply engaged with some of the largest water and sewage authorities, in particular in Dhaka and Chittagong. Our agency in Dhaka happily enjoys excellent working relations with concerned authorities, be it Ministry of Finance, Bangladesh Bank, Ministry of Local Development, and others. And it has started new partnerships with climate change well-established think tanks, such as the ICCCAD, ICAD, in close cooperation with Professor Salimul Haq. A successful development policy needs strong ownership, and Bangladesh has a very strong ownership to its development policy, as was stated recently by the executive director of our AFD when he paid a visit here in March. But our relations are also perfectible on a range of issues. The enormous trade imbalance to the detriment of my country. Approximately 90% of our trade volume is made of imports by France, even more than 90%. Difficulties and hurdles confronting French companies already here or wishing to establish themselves in Bangladesh for commercial or investment purposes must be mentioned. In the field of security and defense, there is a clear appetite of Bangladesh's armed forces to acquire French equipment as an answer, a high-quality answer to their needs. But the financing side is an issue. Let's hope it will change. We, of course, stand ready to help diversify the very one-sided current situation of Bangladesh's armed forces, or maybe I should say 1.5, 1.5 one-sided situation. The issue, eventually, the issue of Bangladesh's image back in Europe, including France, is also something to be perfected, but it's not in our hands, France's hands in the first instance. So I would like to now jump to the future outlook of our relations, just to say a few words. I think it actually depends on a range of factors. First of all, of course, the geopolitical context. Russia. Nobody knows what is precisely going on in Mr. Putin's brains, hence how long his horrendous invasion of Ukraine is going to last, with all its economic consequences on all of us, including Bangladesh. Burma, because we don't say Myanmar officially. How strong is the ruling junta, and to what extent can it continue to impair on Bangladesh's security at the border? US-China feuds. What impact on world trade? What degree of strategic insecurity in the Indo-Pacific region is it having, impacting Bangladesh? That's also an open question. Regarding our respective Indo-Pacific visions, the French strategy in the region is different from that of other countries. The French strategy in Indo-Pacific regions is a balanced one, as shown by its emphasis on the blue economy, sustainable fisheries, green port and connectivity. All these issues belong to our country's Indo-Pacific agenda, while in the case of some other countries, it is more focused on security and defense. On such shared goals with Bangladesh, we can build up a constructive and concrete agenda. Second kind of range of factors which we have to take into consideration looking at the future, our respective, and I would say the immediate future, our respective domestic landscapes. France's domestic situation has been recently challenged by a significant opposition movement in the streets as well as in our parliament, but in vain. I'm sure you all heard about the protests which took place against a very much needed reform concerning pensions and retirement modalities. President Macron has always said that our ability to introduce much needed reforms internally would help France come stronger at the forefront on the European scene as well as on the international scene. In Bangladesh, you're going to have elections. What will be the political landscape early 2024? Nobody knows by definition. Hence, it's impossible to predict the future political and economical context and which kind of measures, legislations will prevail on a rather short term concerning the activities of foreign companies, and of course I'm thinking including French companies. A third set of factors we should also have in mind is our respective political will, if the two previous factors are cleared, the geopolitical one and the domestic scene one. So if these two factors are cleared, remains, of course, our respective political will. If we have some predictability on the regional impacts of the geopolitical scene and on the respective domestic landscapes, then we should bet on the furthering of very warm bilateral French-Bangladeshi relations. The economic recovery would also allow Bangladesh to commit itself more firmly on strategic prospects with France, be it in the civilian as in the defense field. Finally, Bangladesh's ability to promote itself better than it has been doing until now Notwithstanding disinformation campaigns organized with a view to tarnishing the image of Bangladesh with some constituencies, there is a significant knowledge deficit about your country. Events such as the Rana Plaza catastrophe have played a role, but it goes beyond this. It is about sheer ignorance. In Europe, what we see in the first instance are those hopeless, illegal, clandestine migrants coming to our shores. Our legislators are deeply moved by the figures of lowest salaries and poor labor conditions until now. They are ignoring the dynamics of change in a country like Bangladesh, in particular when it comes to women empowerment, so something needs to be done. Let me draw some provisional conclusions after having said all that. Let me first thank the Cosmos Foundation for this opportunity to look back at France's relation with Bangladesh and their outlook. In my view, it would be advisable to concentrate more on one particular actor, the youth of Bangladesh. Why? Wherever they step up, some bad habits such as corruption or absence of dedication to their work positions decrease significantly. They are truly committed to climate action, and their potential to teach us many good practices is very high. Their education level gives a lot of hope regarding their ability to promote the best policies in many areas. This is, of course, good news for France and Bangladesh relations. We can rely on those new generations in all fields. Let me stress a final point. When I visited the Rohingya camps in Cox's Bazar a month ago, the local representatives of the government have an important role to play in the everyday life of the camps. The ones I met were mostly young civil servants, very aware of the challenges of the situation there. I was told by many UN and NGO old representatives that this was a significant change from the previous years. I also witnessed the ongoing empowerment by Bangladeshi citizens taking over many NGOs and responsibility positions in the management of the camps. This is very encouraging despite the rest of the context. Let me close this humble lecture by a quote of one of my favorite political scientists, Raymond Aron. The choice in politics is not between good and bad, but between preferable and despicable. Thank you very much.
The French did not stay long in the Indian subcontinent, basically because France probably did not pursue, or after it lost the 7 Years' War, which was the first global conflict involving most European powers, predating World War I. Basically, the British had established their superiority over the sea lanes. And they had, as one comment stated, converted the Indian Ocean, and particularly the Bay of Bengal, into a British lake. And so that perhaps, coupled with a couple of incidental events that took place, probably edged out France from being able to stay longer in the Indian subcontinent. As has been said, the French also, following the path of the British and the Portuguese, basically set up the French East India Company, founded it in 1664, to compete with the British and the Portuguese and the Dutch competitors. It's interesting, and I have my own theory about that, which I'll mention briefly, but what triggered off the 100 years between the mid-15th to the mid-16th century was known as the Age of Discovery. This was facilitated by the invention of a number of tools. And these tools basically spurred the desire to find new routes, and several circumstances forced that. One, the Mongol Empire was disintegrating, so the areas that they controlled were very unruly and fraught with great danger for Europeans who used to normally travel across land routes to come to the east. And therefore, they had to seek out sea routes. Number two, in the Mediterranean which had the ancient sea routes, that was controlled by the Ottoman Turks and the Venetians. So they had to find alternative routes, and in this search for the alternative routes basically led them to find new lands. It was a search for new routes rather than lands. I don't think initially it was lands which impelled them. Maybe to some extent, but not entirely. Certainly, but the invention of the astrolabe, the magnetic compass, the caravel, the sextant, and the Mercator's projection, all these spurred the desire for more knowledge, plus the compulsions of having to find safer routes away from being preyed upon by Mongols and Turks. But in addition to this, I think what also spurred the European powers out was the effects, the fallout from the Treaty of Westphalia, which basically established the modern state system that we know of today. So they could not so easily anymore just prey upon each other in the European continent, but they still needed more and more resources, and there was nothing in that treaty that prevented them from going overseas. So in that sense, that's how they came this way. France began establishing colonies in North America, Caribbean, and India in the 17th century, but lost most of these possessions, as I said, after the Seven Years' War. And when it rebuilt its new empire, the Second Empire, it was mostly after 1850, basically concentrating chiefly in Africa as well as Indochina and the South Pacific. They stayed away from what is known as the mainland South Asia. In India, the power play was primarily against the very, very strong British competitors. And here again, I would argue, I was greatly influenced by one British philosopher scientist, Barrington Moore, whose thesis was that democracy and dictatorship both have social origins. And he did that through a study of the evolution of British society before Magna Carta and after Magna Carta on, and to say if a dictatorship establishes itself, it does so through use of very hard power, whereas in democracy, it will use softer powers. And I think in the subcontinent, interestingly, both France and Britain were given the beach holes, or where they could establish bases by the same, in Bengal particularly, by the same governor, provincial governor, Ibrahim Khan Lodi. But the French explorer, de Vitre, François de Vitre, he reportedly had already met Akbar and had conveyed his impressions and assessment of what India was like and the countries they had traveled to. But it was during the time of Jahangir that this really came to the fore. The French allied themselves. They also, like the British, used local rulers to advance their interests. But the English did it in a more stronger, muscular way than the French did. French allied themselves, I think, more along civilizational lines. They allied with Sirajuddaulah, the last Nawab, and the British allied with Sirajuddaullah's, the man who toppled him, who conspired with the British and the Battle of Plassey that you mentioned and all that happened. So one, perhaps less muscularity, more intellectual approach to it, more civilization approach to it is what perhaps edged France out.
Easing of doing business by the Europeans in Bangladesh, I would very humbly like to point to you, as I have pointed out to EU, HOM, His Excellency Charles, that we talk a lot about easing businesses for Europeans or the Westerners or other countries in Bangladesh, but we often do not see what are the ways there can be easing of businesses for Bangladeshis to European Union. For example, Schengen visa regime, how it prevents Bangladeshi businessmen to acquire visa in proper time, even when someone is going to planning to go to European countries, Schengen countries, to see if there is any possibilities of expanding business. There are a number of visa-related, sort of issues that they have to experience here. So this is one of the areas that I've been pointing out for quite some time, that there has to be an ease of business on Bangladeshi businessmen's perspective as well. Bangladesh's, let us not forget Bangladeshi, wherever Bangladesh's economic position is, but Bangladesh is making significant contribution in terms of investing in other countries, and it has started from the Asian region. There are possibilities that this will be expanded in other region as well. Leaving aside the overall economic trajectory of economic diplomacy between Bangladesh and France, let me point out a few examples of development diplomacy. So what do we understand by development diplomacy is that Bangladesh's emphasis is not only in pursuing traditional economic diplomacy, but also to pursue the countries that can be an effective partner in its development. So here we can see in terms of Chattogram port, and where I do not know the French word, so I'm using the abbreviation, CMA and CGM. It is the second largest freighter of France that operates between Chattogram and French ports. So this is one of the areas that we need not forget how this has created ease of business, export and import business between Bangladesh and France. Then also in terms of energy efficiency, how Bangladesh and France has signed energy efficiency agreements, where Bangladesh's drive to acquire energy security can be contributed by French, by the French. Number two, bilateral relations. So here bilateral relations is strengthened to identify areas of cooperation which has multilateral implications as well. One of the areas where bilateral relations has taken a very strong foothold is the area of defense cooperation. As Her Excellency pointed out, that there is appetite for better equipment coming from France in the defense sector. So in November 9, 2021, there was a LOI, letter of intent, signed between Bangladesh and France, where five particular points were identified. For example, capacity building, technology transfer, training facilities, providing defense equipments at each other's request, and each other's ability to respond to this particular interest. So these four areas were particularly identified by the French and the Bangladesh in furthering defense diplomacy between the between the two countries. Number three, one other point mentioned by Her Excellency is France's unwavering support to Bangladesh on Rohingya issue. This is something is at the heart of Bangladesh's foreign policy, along with the Indo-Pacific issue, is that Bangladesh looks at how this issue not only can be resolved, but what are the ways this repatriation of Rohingyas to Myanmar can be safe and sustainable, so that Bangladesh does not have to go through this once again in the future.
First of all is, again, only one indulgence. And very few people know about this, but we talked about Chandanagar, but in 1722, the French East India Company actually received permission from the Nawab of Dhaka to set up a factory in Dhaka. But the French East India Company, because of financial difficulties, did not proceed with this. So the Dhaka and the French have basically basically they have a history of lost opportunities. So we would like to try to correct this. And just one more point, in Shondeep, and we all know that Shondeep is, again, there was a French factory over there, which is basically the factory at Jogdia, which basically acquired raw materials and shipped them to all the way to Chandanagar and then to France. And even then, the main item of trade for the French was basically the textiles. Nothing much has changed. And now we go to the present day scenario, which has already been talked about. Yes, indeed, our trade figures as of 2021 and is over 3 billion euros. The bilateral trade is 3.26 billion euros, and obviously 3.01 billion euros, again, we have exported to the French market. As has already been mentioned by a few of my speakers, France is our 5th largest trading partner, 3rd largest trading partner within the European Union. And unfortunately for the French is that, again, is that our imports from France, or France's exports to Bangladesh, has actually regressed. It has gone down by 20% as of last year, and now it stands at 191 million euros. So this trade deficit needs to be rectified for future cooperation and collaboration. Now, what we export basically what? Ready-made garments and leather products. Not much has changed over 300 years. And in terms of French imports, it's about, again, industrial equipments, engineering equipments, and also active pharmaceutical ingredients. These are the main 3 components. But how can we take this further? And this is the point where I'd like to add something. For Bangladesh, because we have been talking for a long time that we need to diversify our export base, this excessive reliance on ready-made garments. So what can we export in the future? Now, the first thing that we can actually explore is a light engineering, like bicycles, where basically the industry is taking off. Or for that matter, plastic or diversified jute products, ceramics. So this could be, and again, France, Germany, Netherlands, these could be the countries where we could basically explore diversification. Now, how can France rectify this massive trade deficit? Now, over here, there are several advantages or opportunities. As mentioned by Inayatullah sir over here, the aviation industry offers us hope. Why? According to the IATA forecast of 2018, the Bangladeshi economy, if everything goes well under normal circumstances, our aviation market is going to increase by 168%. Because that's a very conservative estimate. Because again, people's income will go up, demand for aviation will increase, and again, demand for French aviation will also increase if the right cards are played. Number 2, something which is probably ignored. There's a rising, and this I know it feels wrong, because in this time of economic crisis where price of onions and chickens are debated, but this is also another fact, more and more people are moving up the middle income bracket, and they can afford better things.
One of the areas where we could really look at when it comes to concrete defense and security cooperation is enhance our cooperation in military training. It was in 1992 that the first French military officer, and I still remember his name quite vividly, Major Willy Lalaus, had come to attend our staff college, and an officer had gone to Paris to attend the staff college. And after that, it was in fits and starts, but in the recent past, the training cooperation, at least at the staff college level, has resumed. We are now regularly invited to the EASHDN for various conferences and other sessions. In fact, there was one which was held just last year. And Guillaume and I have discussed on these issues many occasions. So I think military education is the first area that I would start with, where I think we could really enormously gain from your expertise. The other area which is also identified in the LOI, I think where there is a tremendous need and opportunity for cooperation, is in the area of peacekeeping. If you look at Bangladesh's peacekeeping commitments today, a significant portion of that peacekeeping commitment is in Francophone Africa, or other parts of Africa too. And we remain largely the first or second highest troop contributing country regularly. So there is also a lot of scope for us to have more specific language training from France. That has already started. But I think we could really benefit from more specialized language training assistance from France. But I wouldn't want to confine it purely to language training, because those regions of Africa where we are operating, let's say Mali or République Centrafricaine, your expertise on that region is perhaps the highest in the world. So there would be a real opportunity for us if we could send our officers and soldiers and other personnel to your institutions to also learn about the areas in which they're going to operate. So I think I would like to look at more holistic peacekeeping cooperation.